Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're going to be doing a build that has been requested for a little while. I'm going to be trying to make my own rendition of Castlevania's Alucard. Now, Alucard is an interesting person to try and build. Obviously, he's the main protagonist of Symphony of the Night, one of the most popular Castlevania games of all time, and as such he comes with a wide range of abilities which can be upgraded throughout the course of the game. There's also the Netflix anime to pull from as well, giving him quite a bit of personality beyond just what the game's, provided, as well as showing off a bunch of other abilities that we could potentially pull from as well. Now, I have not personally played all the way through Symphony of the Night. I've played it a little bit before, but I've never managed to sit down and do a full playthrough, but I have seen the whole show, so I do have a kind of an idea of what the identity of this build is going to be. That namely is going to be focusing on Alucard's equipment upgrades that he gets throughout Symphony of the Night, kind of influencing our own decisions about our equipment, as well as the, kind of aspects that make up his kit, such as his dark magic, which allows him to use hellfire-based spells, his shape-shifting ability to allow him to turn into things like wolves or clouds of mist, and, a few other things. He's also known for having a very, very high speed stat, shall we say, so I did want speed to be part of the equation as well. There's just a lot of things that kind of make up what Alucard's general ability set is. He's also got a little bit of summoning in there as well, so I wanted to make sure to get that somehow as well, and kind of just get his general fighting style down. Now, before this video truly gets underway, I do want to point out an elephant in the room of sorts. As of now, there is a mod that is available for both console and PC on the mod manager that is called the Vampire Origin mod. I have used it in a video before, but that mod is basically directly inspired by Castlevania. It allows you to play as an origin character who starts off as a vampire and also gives those vampires, including Astarion, extra abilities, which include shapeshifting, and basically everything I just said. So before you sit down and expect me to just make a build based on that mod, that's not what we're doing today. As much as that mod basically would be a build in and of itself, and then you could just slap whatever levels you want on top of it, that's not really the point of a build video. If you want to use that mod to make this build better, absolutely, go for it. It would actually allow you to have a bit more freedom in the levels that you choose, but I did want to show off that this concept can be done without that mod, just to kind of show the actual fun build making aspect of it, because I think I've come up with something that is pretty fun and decently strong, so I do want to show that off today. But just so you know, there is a mod out there that basically does all of this for you, and anyone could pick it up. But yeah, that's going to do it for the kind of intro. Let's get in to the build. I actually did decide to use Astarion for this build today. I think it makes sense to use, the half-elven vampire who has a grudge against, his vampire master. It's kind of a similar parallel to the Alucard Dracula story, except there's less familial relation. So I felt like it made sense to use Astarion. That's going to give us his classic bite attack, which has all sorts of unique benefits, as well as just allowing us to play as a vampire, which in my opinion makes sense. So this is an Astarion build today, because Astarion is a elf. I don't know why I said half elf. He is an elf. Whoops. We are going to gain access to a few things like elven weapon training, giving us long sword, short bow, and longbow proficiency, as well as regular dark vision and the classic Fey ancestry, giving us advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and we can't be put to sleep by magic. Not being put to sleep by magic does kind of feel like it makes sense for a vampire, but that's just me personally. He is a high elf, so we do get to choose a high elf cantrip. I always like to take friends with this cantrip, especially if I'm not making an intelligence focused build, because for those of you that don't know, high elf cantrips and high half elf cantrips do work with intelligence. So just taking friends, since we're going to have a high charisma build with this character, does make sense. Speaking of high charisma, our starting class is going to be Warlock today. Warlock is going to give us a bunch of things, namely with the Fiend subclass, it's going to give us access to fiery-based spells and charisma-based attacks, which are going to feel very, very good on this build. And again, the whole point of Alucard is that he is kind of using dark magic from hell itself, so maybe that does kind of work as a source of his power, like a fiendish patron. I don't know. Again, this is the Baldur's Gate 3 version. I wanted to use Warlock levels for this build, so I'm going to. God damn it. This is going to give us access to a few new spells added to our spell list, like Hellish Rebuke and Burning Hands, as well as Dark One's Blessing. Whenever you reduce a hostile creature to 0 hit points, this gift from your patron, sorry, I should say, not from your patient, will grant you temporary hit points. Basically, whenever you kill a creature based on your charisma modifier and your warlock level, you'll gain temporary hit points. When this build is finished, you'll gain 10 temporary hit points per kill, which is nothing to sneeze at. As for our cantrips, I do have the Mistress Spells mod that is available to all platforms, which I highly recommend you download, as it will give you a lot more options. In this case, I've gone for Green Flame Blade for kind of a Hell Flame Fire attack, and Bone Chill to be our primary ranged cantrip. As you can see, I'm going for a theme of fire and necrotic damage, again kind of the blend of hellfire and the undead nature of the vampire to create an interesting damage set. Now, I've done fire and necrotic damage stuff before, check out my Ghost Flame Blade build from way back in the day, but this is kind of a fun way to do it. Again, Green Flame Blade allowing us to attack, dealing extra fire damage, which will go up as a flat damage buff as we level up, as well as the fire can spread to adjacent creatures, dealing them damage as well. As Bone Chill is going to allow us to do 1d8 necrotic damage and prevent targets from healing, which feels very in line with a vampire. As I said, we've already gone with the Fiend, and we do get to choose 2 spells. Personally, I'm going to go for Hellish Rebuke, because it's a very unique spell. You don't get access to it very often, and it is quite a nice way to use our reaction to deal a big dollop of fire damage. But I'm also going to go with Armour of Agathis to give us that kind of cold chill of the night type vibe. This is also going to give us temporary hit points. This build is going to have a lot of different ways to get temporary hit points, allowing you to be quite tanky. Overall, I believe between these two, you've got a pretty decent set at level 1. Moving on to our skill points and skill proficiencies. First up, we have Dexterity at 16. This is mainly here to help with our armor class, which is something that we will like. By the time this build is done, we should have about a 21 in AC. Constitution is at 14. We actually don't have that many powerful concentration spells that we're going to be wanting to focus on, and with our high AC, we're not too likely to get hit, so Constitution can be kind of middling, but feel free to swap Dexterity and Constitution based on the armor that you choose. Strength and Intelligence are both at 8 because we don't need them. Wisdom is at 12 because I quite like to have this for those pesky saving throws, and Charisma is at 16. This is going to be our main spellcasting modifier as well as our main attacking stat, but at level 1 we'll be using Dexterity, so you don't have to worry about either stat being higher than the other. For our skill proficiencies, Astarion is a charlatan, giving him access to sleight of hand and deception, as well as perception from being an elf. We have gone for the skill proficiencies from Warlock of intimidation, because I think that just makes sense, as well as Arcana, because again, we're a very magical being in this sense. I think it makes sense to know a little bit about the magic around us, but feel free to change that one up. That one's a bit of a throwaway pick anyway. So yeah, that's level 1. At level 2, we're going to be a Warlock level 2, giving us access to our second spell slot, as well as another spell from our spell list. Now, it's entirely up to you what you want to grab here. I have both the Mistress Spell mod and the 1D&D Spell List Revisions mod. Basically, what that means is we have all the spells here from tabletop, as well as additional spells added to our basic spell list that were brought about by changes from the new D&D edition. So, overall, you will have a lot more options to pick from if you have those 2 mods installed, both of which are available on console, and I highly recommend you do pick them up, as it elevates the gameplay a lot, in my opinion. So it's really up to you what you want to grab here. I think I'll keep it fairly simple and just go for Burning Hands, because I do feel like that fits the build quite nicely, but you do have a lot of options to pick from. We're also going to get our Eldritch Invocations at this point. Now, with a surprising amount of my Warlock builds, we're actually not taking Eldritch Blast today, so Agonizing Blast and Impelling Blast are kind of off the table. So I'm definitely going to recommend Devil's Sight here. I think it's just a useful skill to have in any situation, as well as, again, I think it just makes sense for a vampire to have this, so we're going to pick it up here. Now, for your other one, I did take Fiendish Vigor in my testing, but then I realized we had so many different sources of temporary HP, but it kind of just didn't make sense. So I feel like Beast Speech could work if you want to speak with animals. If you decide to go the unarmored route, which I don't know why you would with this build, but you could go for Armor of Shadows for Mage Armor. Beguiling Influence would make sense, but we do already have proficiency in Deception, but if you wanted to change up your starting skills and take this, you could, as it would also give you Persuasion. There's Mask of Many Faces if you want Disguise Self, which I definitely think could make sense for this build. One with Shadows, which would allow you to turn invisible as long as you stand still. That could definitely work, and honestly probably fits the best with the build, so we're going to go with that. Moving on. At Warlock level 3, we're going to get to choose our Pact Boon as well as a level 2 spell of our choice. I'm going to go for Scorching Ray to give us a pretty damning fire ranged attack that's going to deal a lot of damage across multiple targets. Scorching Ray, very, very good. Everyone knows that at this point, so worth picking up. We're also going to go for our Pact Boon, in which I'm going to obviously choose Pact of the Blade to give us our charisma-based attacks. I know, it's a bit boring and lame. I promise I'll try and build around Pact of the Chain one day. You know, when I'm feeling insane and I've finally lost my mind from doing all these build videos. So yeah, but Pact of the Blade, definitely worth it on this build. It's going to give us charisma-based attacks, as well as it's going to give us the ability to summon a Pact weapon in the early game, which could give us access to a weapon in the early game if you're not going to go with my early game pick. I mean, later on, by the time you finish this build, we will actually have a weapon that uses our spellcasting modifier anyway, without Pact of the Blade. So if you don't care about extra attack, you could go with Pact of the Tome for the extra spellcasting it would give you. But I do care about extra attacks, so we're going to grab that with Pact of the Blade. Moving on to Warlock level 4, we're going to gain access to another cantrip. Now, again, I don't really want to take Eldritch Blast on this build because I feel like it kind of goes against what I'm going for here. So I'm going to just take Mage Hand instead because I feel like it's a generally great utility spell. We're also going to get to choose another level 2 spell at this point, and in my testing I did take Misty Step. Again, one of Alucard's abilities is to turn into a cloud of mist and kind of move around that way. So I thought Misty Step would kind of be a good kind of in-character teleportation option, that would just be great for movement, so we're going to pick that up here. We also do get to choose a feat at this point, and since we are a Warlock and we're very charisma based, let's bump up that charisma to an 18. At Warlock level 5, we are going to get that Deepened Pact feature for extra attack with Pact of the Blade, as well as the fact that we're going to choose a level 3 spell as well. Now, you may be thinking, hey, Gaseous Form is right there. Isn't that, like, literally turning into a mist cloud? Yes, you are correct, and that would be very good to get. But we're not going to get it here, we're going to get it later on. Instead, we're gonna take Fireball. Come on, we cannot be a build that uses Dark Hell fire magic and not take Fireball for 8d6 of fire damage in a big circle. Definitely want this for this build. We also are going to be able to choose an Eldritch Invocation, and as always, I like to go with Mire the Mind to grab the Slow spell, which is one of the best control spells in the game. If you're going to get a concentration spell on this build, Slow is probably going to be the one that you want. I also like to reflavor this as rather than us actually making our enemy slow, we're just moving very, very fast because we're Alucard, you know? So I kind of like the flavoring of that here. You do also have Sign of Ill Omen if you want Bestow Curse, but Mire the Mind is a bit better, so we're going to go with that here. Now, with level 5 of Warlock, we're actually done with our Warlock levels, which means now we're going to move over to Druid. Now, this may seem like a weird pick, but hear me out. One of Alucard's kind of big things is his shape-shifting, and one of the best ways to get that is through Druid. Not to mention, Druid is also going to give us a bunch of stuff that is just going to make sense for this build in addition to that. Now, yes, our wisdom is rather low, but we're mostly going to be taking utility spells from Druid rather than offensive spells, and mainly just focusing on using the subclass features that we're going to be getting. So overall, Druid is still going to feel like a pretty solid pick for this build. So, moving on to the Druid cantrips. Again, obviously we're not really going to be using anything offensive here, so let's just take the two useful utility cantrips, that being Guidance and Resistance. Guidance is obviously one of the best cantrips in the game, no question about that, and Resistance will definitely have its uses, so they're perfectly welcome on this build. We are also going to get access to two level 1 spells here, and I'm going to go with Enhanced Sleep and Long Strider. Enhanced Sleep is going to give us a triple jumping distance, which is going to be great for moving around, and again, feels very on theme for the nimble Alucard, especially when our 8 strength is going to hamper our jumping distance in most cases. This is really going to help. As well as Long Strider to give us even more movement speed, because again, he's very, very fast. At Druid level 2, we're going to get to choose our subclass. Now, you could go with Circle of the Moon if you really wanted to lean into the shapeshifting aspect, but I feel like this build is going to get more out of Circle of the Spores. Circle of the Spores is going to actually give us the Bone Chill cantrip, but we're still going to take it as a Warlock because this version would use our Wisdom, and we want to make sure we're using our Charisma to cast that cantrip. So even though you're going to technically be double dipping on that one, you're still going to want to use the Charisma-based version. But the Circle of Spores is going to be interesting as it's going to give us Symbiote symbiotic entity. You gain 4 temporary hit points per druid level, so at this level it would be 8 temporary hit points, and deal an additional 1d6 necrotic damage when you attack while those temporary hit points are up. You can also cast Halo of Spores as a necrotic damage reaction-based attack. So overall, this is going to give us a bit more tankiness. Maybe you want to respec and drop Armour of Agathis if you want to mainly focus on the temporary HP from this instead. But you do have 2 sources of temporary HP there, which feels pretty nice. So you can kind of use one when you're out of the other to kind of remain tanky. But yeah, Symbiotic Entity is going to feel great for this build. It's going to add necrotic damage to our attacks, give us a bit more tankiness, as well as we're also going to gain access to that Wolf Wild shape that we so covet. Unfortunately, because we're not playing a Moon Druid, we're not actually going to get the Dire Raven wild shape, which was my kind of way of flavouring the bat transformation that vampires get. But if you grab the Corvid token instead, that will allow you to do that anyway, and also give you Featherfall permanently, so that will feel pretty good on this build. So I forgot to include the Corvid token in the actual equipment section later on, so I thought I'd mention it now. So yes, you can definitely have the Corvid token on this build for that kind of flavouring, but overall, you definitely want Circle of the Spores. Moving on, we do get to grab another spell at this level, and really we kind of already have the 2 things that I mainly wanted here. Again, with the Mistress spell mod though, we can grab Absorb Elements to help us resist elemental damage, as well as deal an additional 1d6 of that element type on our next attack. This is just a generally useful reaction-based spell to have, similar to Shield, so I don't mind picking that up here, but you do have other options available to you if you want them. At level 3 of Druid, we're going to gain access to level 2 spells, including 2 spells from our, our subclass. We get Blindness, which is normally a pretty good spell, but again, this does use our Wisdom for the save, and it is a Constitution save, so I'm going to be honest with you, you're never going to get this off in the early game, in the late game even. So I would say if you really want to use Blindness, pick it up as a Warlock instead. However, we do get Detect Thoughts, which I think is an interesting spell for this build to have, kind of helps with the roleplay, so, I mean, we're getting it for free, so I think it's quite a nice pick to have. We are also going to get a level 2 spell at this point, and it's entirely up to you what you want to grab. Honestly, I would actually maybe drop Absorb Elements, because we don't actually need it. We can always put it back in later if we feel like we do. I definitely want to pick up Aid, which comes from the 1D&D spell list revisions, to give us even more hit points. If we use our highest level spell slot with Aid, we'll actually have over 100 HP with this build, plus the eventual 28 temporary hit points from Symbiotic Entity. We will have a decent chunk of HP, making us quite tanky. So Aid at it, even if you use a level 3 spell slot, which we will have a lot of thanks to the Warlock levels, you'll still have a decent chunk of HP, so I definitely recommend it on this build if you've got the mod, which you should do, because I've told you to. You better listen to me. No point in following these videos if you're not going to listen to me. Also, you can grab another spell at this level. I kind of liked Passive Out Trace actually for this build, as obviously Alucard does have some stealthy aspects to him, and while we don't have stealth proficiency, Passive Out Trace is going to help us and the whole team with stealth checks. So if you really want to get the drop on your enemy, I highly recommend this one. Moving on to Druid level 4, we are going to gain access to another cantrip, but all of these are going to use our Wisdom modifier in some way, shape or form, most likely. So really, I mean, we could take Shape Water to make blocks of ice. Yeah, you know what, that sounds pretty good. Also, we do get to pick another spell at this level, and I would say if you want to kind of get a unique kind of like Hellfire spell, then Flaming Spear could be a fun extra summon to add to the battlefield, although this one does cost you concentration, so I do seeing it losing some weight to it pretty early on. So maybe not the best choice in the world, maybe just stick with Absorb Elements, entirely up to you. We also do get to choose another feat at this point, and it's entirely up to you if you want to bump up your Dexterity for more AC, or your Charisma for more attack power. I'm going to go with Charisma on this build. I might have chosen Dexterity for some point during my testing, which means the AC might be a bit weird. I honestly can't remember. I recorded the combat footage for this a couple of days ago, so you'll have to forgive me, my schedule's been a bit all over the place lately, but Charisma will give us pretty much everything we want in terms of damage with our spells, damage with our weapons, etc, etc. So if you want a bit more AC, go for Dexterity, otherwise Charisma will be fine. At level 5, we are going to get access to level 3 spells, including 2 from our subclass. Number 1 is Animate Dead, so kind of an undead servant summon. Kind of makes sense for a vampire build, as well as the aforementioned Gaseous Form. Now, at the cost of our concentration, we can transform ourselves into a tiny gas cloud. We cannot fall, we fit through small openings, and are very hard to damage, meaning that we actually gain resistance to pretty much all damage. We also have advantage on Constitution, Dexterity, and Strength saving throws. Overall, it does have some utility, as in it can get you out of a kind of tricky situation, but otherwise, it's very situational. Like I said, when it works, it'll feel very, very good to use, but otherwise, it's mainly here just for the kind of vampire Alucard flavor. We also do get to choose some level 3 spells at this point, and I would absolutely say Warden of Vitality has become one of my favorite spells. Cast it as an action at the start of combat, and then for the next 9 or 10 turns, depending on how quick you initiate combat, you can just, every bonus action, cast Restore Vitality to heal yourself. Honestly, an amazing spell, which I really, really like having around. As well as we're going to grab Summon Fae. Again, Alucard has summoning magic as part of his kit, so the idea of taking Summon Fae felt kind of in line with what I wanted to do with this build. You can summon 3 different kinds of Fae, one that is fuming, one that is mirthful, and one that is tricksy. Basically, the difference between all of these are the fact that they get a teleportation ability that inflicts different effects upon the Fae itself. Fuming makes it so they have advantage on the next attack roll, which is what I used in my combat footage. Mirthful makes it so that they become charmed, so they can cast Mirthful Charms, so potentially charm an enemy. Sorry, I have to remember what these do. And Tricksy means that they cast Tricksy Darkness. So basically they get to cast Darkness, which is kind of cool. So you have a few different utility options as part of the summon. It also the summon itself is like a Fey Hound, which I felt very, very on theme for like a build like this, to kind of like almost like a Hellhound type thing from Shadow Sorcerer. So I think this is a good spell to have for this build. At Druid level 6, we're going to gain Fungal Infestation. Basically, we can spend our new unique resource, Fungal Infestation Charges, as a reaction to raise humanoid corpses as a slightly weaker version of Animate Dead. But they do spread as a fungal infestation, a bit like The Last of Us. So if they go on to kill other things, those things will also resurrect as zombies. So, you know, you get to start a little zombie plague. You're also going to gain access to the Owlbear and Panther wild shapes as well. The Owlbear is very, very good, even with lower Druid levels, so it's worth considering using. We also gain access to another spell at this point. Again, kind of have everything that I want already, so just kind of pick your favorite. At Druid level 7, we're going to gain access to 2 level 4 spells, Blight for massive necrotic damage, and Confusion for battlefield control. We're also going to gain access to 2 more spells, then now we also gain access to level 4 spells as well. I'm personally going to recommend Fire Shield, which is going to give us a either fiery or icy aura, whether we want to go for the Chill of the Vampire's Night, or the Rolling Hellfire aura, which is going to deal damage to anyone who attacks us, which is going to feel very, very nice. We're also going to get Summon Elemental, allowing us to summon a Hellfire being or a different elemental of our choosing. Again, it's just more bodies to fill the board, but overall, we've got a pretty solid kit here. We've got speed, we've got utility, we've got healing, and we've got summons and defensive tactics. All of this coming from our Druid levels, which is going to fill out the build very, very nicely. The reason I wanted to go to level 7 of Druid rather than going for like a 4-8 split or something like that, well, obviously extra attack, but also I wanted to go for as many Druid levels as we could to get as much temporary HP from Symbiotic Entity as possible, and the 5-7 split is the best way to do that on this build. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a little bit of everything. You're going to have melee offense, you're going to have spell offense, you're going to have a ton of tankiness and a lot of HP, you're going to have speed, you're going to have healing, you're going to have a ton of defensive tactics, and you're going to have summons. Basically, you got a little something for everything, all sticking within the vampire theme. Again, we've got things like the Vampire Bite from Astarion and such like that. And you're going to, like I say, you have massive offense with Fireball, and you basically have the ability to use any weapon you like thanks to Bind Pact Weapon, and you just have a bunch of different things going for you. Now, I will say that the biggest weakness of this build is that in the late game, the temporary HP that you get from Symbiotic Entity can disappear quite quickly. Obviously, if you take some big attacks, this build is going to work at its best when it's paired up with your teammates, you know, Trevor and Cypher. So you want to make sure that you're playing this as part of a team. In solo testing, in some cases it did struggle a little bit to maintain those temporary hit points to get the full use out of its features, but at the end of the day, it was still quite the offensive powerhouse and had a lot of utility going for it to be able to manage itself rather well. So this build definitely has its ups and downs, but if you're trying to build Alucard without the Vampire Origin mod, this is, in my opinion, pretty much the best way to get everything that he does. You definitely are going to be a master, like a jack of all trades but master of none type deal. You are going to feel like you are weaker in some areas and some abilities might not come up so much. Otherwise though, you do have a little something for every situation. So let's move on to the equipment, as I did say that was going to be somewhat of an important part of this build. Towards the end of the game, Alucard's going to get all sorts of armor pieces that are going to give him enhanced buffs, and again, we wanted as much Hellfire stuff on this build as we could, so you're going to notice a bit of a theme. First up for our weapon, we have the Infernal Rapier, so you are going to need to have Will in your party to get the most out of this build. The Infernal Rapier is going to give you a +1 bonus to your spell save DC, which is great, but instead of your dexterity modifier, the affected entity adds its spellcasting ability modifier to attack rolls. So obviously this is kind of a diet Pact of the Blade. We still want Pact of the Blade overall for extra attack. You're still going to have this be your Pact weapon to get the full advantage, but technically this is where you could go with Pact of the Tome instead if you don't care about extra attack. Otherwise, though, we do gain access to a summon with this weapon, Planar Ally Cambion. We get to summon a Cambion, so summoning a minion from Hell itself definitely feels on theme for what we're going for here. It can do things like charm enemies, deal massive amounts of psychic damage to those charmed enemies, and use Rays of Fire, which is a powerful ranged cantrip in a similar sense to Scorching Ray. But yeah, in the early game though, you could grab the Rupturing Blade, which is just a pretty solid +1 early game rapier, and of course Alucard is known for using a very pointy sword, so I thought a rapier made sense. And it also comes with the Searing Blood ability, allowing you to do a bit of extra damage just with your attack. So overall, pretty fun. Entirely up to you kind of what you want to go with. Again, you could use the summoned Pact weapon in the early game instead, but the Rupturing Blade still feels quite good. But I do think the Infernal Rapier for that summon is going to be our end goal. Ignore that extra 1d6 of fire damage that comes from another piece of equipment. Speaking of our other pieces of equipment, we have the Hell Dusk Helmet. This is going to kind of act as like a light version of Devil's Sight, so if you do end up going with this, you might want to respec Devil's Sight into something else. Again, there's a lot of freedom of what you could do with this build, but if you take Devil's Sight, then you also have the ability to choose a different headpiece, but this one feels pretty good anyway. You cannot be blinded, great. The wearer gains a +2 bonus to saving throws against spells, amazing, and critical hits cannot be landed against you, amazing. You're also going to get the Immolating Gaze ability that can be used once per short rest that allows you to stare at an enemy, dealing 2d8 fire damage and frighten them as well. It will also deal an additional bit of damage against enemies that are already burning. We can't inflict burning at the moment, but if you have an ally that can, feel free to go for it. But overall, this is a pretty solid on-theme endgame helmet, but you have complete freedom over what you want to put in this slot, because of Devil's Sight and all that. That's kind of the main thing there. So feel free to put whatever you like here. It really doesn't matter. Just make sure it is something you can actually wear, because, you know, this isn't considered armor at all, it's just considered like basic clothing, so anyone can wear it, but just make sure you've got the armor proficiency for what you want to use. But for the early game, we can go for the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. Whenever you inflict a condition, you gain Arcane Synergy for 2 rounds, which allows your weapon attacks to deal additional damage equal to your spellcasting ability modifier. This is a pretty solid early game option, which I think works well for the build. Moving on, we do have the Cloak of Protection here for a +1 armor class and saving throws. With our slightly lower constitution and the fact that we want to keep up our temporary HP as much as we can, having as high of an AC as possible makes sense for this build, so I wanted to make sure we have this on here, but it's totally optional. 20 AC is still pretty good. Speaking of how we're getting that AC, the Armor of Agility, allowing you to add your full dexterity modifier to your armor class, not impose disadvantage on stealth ability checks, and gives you a +2 to saving throws. It is a medium armor with uncapped dexterity modifier at 17 AC. You guys all know the Armor of Agility. It is one of the best armors in the game, and since one of Alucard's endgame upgrades is a very solid piece of armor, I think it makes sense to use one of the best armors in the game for this build. However, for the early game, you can go for things like the Padded Armor and the Padded Armor 2. I'm wearing camp clothing here, but the Padded Armors did feel like they kind of felt a bit more like Alucard's outfit personally, if we're just going with base game looks, but otherwise, the Armor of Agility will work fine, and you can use camp clothing like I have. Moving on to our gauntlets, we have the Hell Dusk Gloves. You're going to gain a +1 bonus to your spell attack rolls and spell save DC, and your weapon attacks are going to deal an additional 1d6 fire damage. You're also going to get the Cambion's Rays of Fire cantrip, usable once per short rest, allowing you to deal a lot of fire damage. So yeah, make sure you use that one. But in the early game and in the late game, if you want, the Daredevil gloves are also going to feel pretty good, allowing your ranged spell attacks to be made as melee attacks, so it doesn't matter how close you are to an enemy. If you're up close and personal, you're not going to impose disadvantage on your spell attack rolls. You are also going to get a +1 bonus to those attack rolls as well, so overall this is another solid option. And finally, again, Alucard is very fast, so we've got the Boots of Speed, allowing us to use click heals to dash as a bonus action, as well as impose disadvantage on opportunity attacks against us, allowing us to get out of most situations if we don't want to spend the spell slot to do so. And overall, for the accessories, we have the Amulet of the Wind Rider. This is going to give us access to Ride the Winds, which is another way of using the Gaseous Form ability. As well as it's going to give us access to Gust of Wind as well, allowing us to cast a Gust of Wind that can knock enemies off balance and push them away. Another option would be the Amulet of Misty Step, giving you an extra free usage of Misty Step once per short rest as a bonus action, so overall that's pretty good. There's also the aforementioned Corbett token, like I say, if you want a flying avian transformation to kind of be reminiscent of a bat and also have Featherfall available to you at all times, that can also work. So Misty Step, Corbett token, or Amulet of the Wind Rider. For our rings, we have the Ring of Arcane Synergy. Whenever you deal damage with a cantrip, you gain Arcane Synergy for 2 turns. So, cast Bone Chill, and your weapon attacks will have your spellcasting ability modifier added next turn. And also for the last ring, we have Crusher's Ring. It says Emerald Ring here, but that's just because the mod I use changes the name for some reason. The Crusher's Ring will give you a +3 bonus to your movement speed, so overall, more movement speed, just more speed in general, because again, Alucard's very fast. This is a throwaway slot, put whatever you like in here. I also considered the Ring of Regeneration for kind of like a vampiric healing factor, which also makes sense. And yeah, for the mechanical side of things, that is the build. Let's talk about the fashion. For camp clothing, as always, we are using the Faya Taylor's camp clothing mod, available to all platforms. Highly recommend it if you basically want transmog in your game. We're going to be going with the Lady Whitburn chest piece, coloured in the, I believe it is the Talos dye, to give us this kind of black with like accents of yellowish gold, which is about as close to Alucard's Castlevania outfit as I could get. We also have the leather boots here, which I'm going to take that Misty Step spell off, because again, I don't know why these camp clothes give you spells. Feels a little bit powerful, but otherwise I just don't use them, and that just kind of gives the overall look that I was going for. We've also got a cloak in the underwear slot, which I've coloured with the owl dye to give us Alucard's all black cape. So yeah, that is the build, and overall I'm pretty happy with this one. I think in terms of trying to make such a character with like such a diverse range of abilities and so much different things going on with him, I feel like I did a pretty good job in getting as much of it as possible, while sticking to the theme and still making a pretty powerful build. Again, you are going to be a bit more reliant on your teammates than some of my other builds with this one, but that's perfectly okay. I've already got a Cypher build on the channel, so maybe the only thing left to do is make Trevor and finally figure out how to do a whip in this game. Seriously, I'm thinking of like Eldritch Knight with a flail. Like, you throw the flail and, like, that's a whip, but it doesn't have the thrown property, so I don't know. If you've got a decent idea of how to make a whip weapon in Baldur's Gate 3, preferably without mods, but if it is a mod, if it could be on the mod manager, like, that would be great, because obviously there's not much point in making a Belmont if you're not going to whip people. Definitely thinking flail is the way to go, as it is the closest thing, but I digress. Either way, I'm pretty happy with this build as it stands. I think it's got everything that I wanted to accomplish in it. It can still handle the tougher encounters in the game pretty well, but you are going to want to make sure that you've got some reliable teammates on your team. Apologies for that. But yeah, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.